This is the Forbes Books Podcast, conversations with amazing humans who are impacting the world of business and beyond. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and many of us have hopes, goals, and resolutions for the new year in our personal and professional lives. They can be anything from losing weight to reading more or becoming a better listener. But I think I've got something we can all work on in 2024, and that's the fear of people's opinions, or FOPO. My guest this week is Dr. Michael Gervais, the co-author of the new book, The First Rule of Mastery: Stop Worrying What People Think of You. Michael is a high-performance psychologist, and he's offering up a guide for overcoming what may be the single greatest constrictor of human potential, our fear of people's opinions. We're going to talk about why we worry so much and what we can do to stop. Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Stoked to be here with you.
So, Mike, I have not shared this story before, but for many, many years, I worked at a radio station in New York with two hosts, and for whatever reason, I was neurotic about leaving them in the room together without me. I would do whatever it took to always be in the room when they're both alone off air. And I don't know why, but I was so self-conscious. To give a little context, they were both a very catty middle-aged men who loved to gossip and everything like that and comment. So to me, how I hacked this was I would never leave the room off air when they're both in the room. I would only step out to go to the bathroom while we were still on the air just to avoid having them left alone in the room by themselves to their own devices. So where does this worry come from? And I know my case is a little heightened because I'm dealing with a couple of, psychopathic radio hosts, but where does this worry come from that we're so stressed about what people think about us?
Well, I love your story because at one level, the brain does not distinguish very well between the tiger in the bush and someone who may or may not like us. That's just kind of a biological wiring that we've been handed down over from our ancestors. And, to kind of get down to the wick of it, our brain is designed for survival. We all know that. It scans the world to find all the things that are dangerous or potentially dangerous. And the smaller part of our brain is designed for optimization and looking for opportunity, but the majority of our brain is a threat mechanism detector. Now, that being said, we know that the tiger in the bush or the wildebeest or the warring tribes, we have to get ready. We have to fight, flight, sometimes freeze, but there's a natural readiness that takes place without even thinking about it. It just short circuits our response mechanism, and we are ready to do the thing, whatever the thing is. And what's not talked about very often, though, is that 200,000 years ago plus, when the tribal elders were looking at us and you and I were doing something and we were underperforming or we were causing a little bit of a mess in the tribe.
I'd probably be dead, Mike, by the way. I don't think I would survive those days, but continue. I don't mean to sidetrack your story, but yes.
No, that's it. So if we were blowing it in some kind of way, the elders or the tribe gets together and says, look, Joe, Mike, you guys got to go. You're not holding the standard. You're not good enough here. You're causing potential danger and harm to us. You got to go. So now you and I are left to go fend for ourselves. And the wild is too wild. And so to forge, to fend, to hunt, to gather, to protect, all of that is just too much for the two of us. Or maybe we've got a couple other friends that kicked out with us, maybe a spouse or two. And it's just the wild's too big. So we need each other. And belonging is safety, so that when we scan the world and we pick up the slightest potential of rejection, our brain goes into a fight, flight, freeze mechanism. And because that is so important, where being rejected from the tribe was a near-death sentence, in modern times, we're not really rejected from the tribe. We're rejected from friends, which is the brain has a hard time distinguishing between the two. It's old programming in modern day dilemmas. And so we gear up, and to gear up for being accepted, to gear up for not being rejected, we worry. And that's the origin of the biological piece of it.
On the biological piece, I know that a lot of this stuff is sort of all wound up in our DNA, no matter where we came from, whether race, gender, creed, whatever. And I know this is kind of like a question you probably can't answer, but does this ever work our way out of the DNA? Like this idea of worry, is it always going to be there just because the cavemen had to deal with it as well?
Yes and no. So there's a mechanism to scan the world to find danger and to think forward, to plan for danger. Our brain is about 3.2 pounds of tissue that sits in our skull. Our mind is invisible. We don't know where our mind lives yet. And so the brain is the tissue. The mind is really what runs the tissue. And if you think about oversimplifying the relationship between hardware is the brain and software is the mind, it falls apart at some level, but for simplicity, it works. Is that if we don't have the right type of software, which is our responsibility to build, the brain will win. And the brain's dictum is survival, scan to find dangers and potential dangers that could come later. And if you don't work with that dictum, it's a strong dictum of the brain. That programming is very robust. It's been around for hundreds of thousands of years. If we don't work with the programming of our mind, the brain takes over. And that's why anxiety is so profound, is because for many of us, we don't have the right software. We don't have the right way to use our mind to work with the power of the brain. And so, no, you don't need to be, in an excessive worry state chronically. That's actually considered a mental disorder. As a psychologist, I take that, I don't say that lightly. And so that's the essence of how this works. We can invest in the quality of our mind, and then we start to be able to work with our brain.
Nice. And that dovetails into your day job as a high performance psychologist. First of all, for folks not familiar with this role, this is one of these roles that live in the stratosphere of the uber wealthy. This is what it looks like to me. Like rich people who want to get richer get a high performance coach because they want to, because they feel like they're just like all their rich friends, so they want to be better than them. So tell me about the job itself. And I know I'm kind of goofing on a little bit here.
I've never heard this description of my industry. It's great. Yeah. And I'll tell you what, you're hitting the nail on the head in one aspect, because it's part of my life purpose is to take from the ivory tower, to take from, the behind the velvet rope and give access to people that would never have access to this beautifully powerful science of high performance psychology. So I hear it. It pains me. And at the same time, I'm trying to do something about it. So was your question what is high performance psychology?
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
And pardon me if I offend, because to me, I think of it, I come from a working class family.
No, you're not offended.
My dad worked in construction. The last thing I think my dad would ever think about was, I need a high performance coach. And so I'm taking it from the ground level of working class Joes. This is not something that comes into their brain, but folks that are trying to elevate their game for whatever field they may be in. So how do you play a part in that?
Okay, so as humans, there's only three things that we can train. We can train our craft, whether that is construction or designing the next AI, whatever. So we can, or leading people, we can train our craft. And for athletes, it's obvious what their craft is. We can train our body, which is basically our carriage, and we can train our mind. That's it. And if my young son was here, he'd say, Dad, you can train your dragon too. Don't ever forget that. Bad joke. Psychologists are not funny. But so there's three basic things that we can train: craft, body, and mind. The best of the best of the best do not leave one of those up to chance. The most high performing individuals in sport, I'm just talking about sport now, they're all in to be great with their craft, to be great with their body, and to be great with their mind. The rest of us, we're kind of just banging around trying to figure out how to be better at the thing we do, but we're not over indexing on the upstream impact, which is our mind. And so traditional psychology started hundreds of years ago studying disorder and dysfunction and, what is this thing that some people are really up one day and really down another day? And why is it some people are really sad a lot? Why is it some people, they talk gibberish? What is that? So that was the origins of psychology, and it was built out of the medical model. What is that disorder that's taking place that we can't explain? Now, about 60 years ago, that there was a fatigue in the system of just studying dysfunction. And there was a group of people that got together to say, hey, what is the psychology of people that are extraordinary? How do people that live the good life, whether it's a high performing life or they're really happy or they've just got this abundance of joy, how do they use their mind? And so I was really attracted to that science and discipline. And so I'm classically trained as a psychologist with a specialization in sport and high performance. And I've worked behind the velvet rope in elite sport for 20 years. In the last 10, I've been crosswalking those best practices into businesses and trying to do it at scale with large corporations like Microsoft and so that's essentially what it is. How do you train and work with your mind so that you can live your good life, whatever that it means to you? And athletes, oftentimes that means it's a two-path approach. It's being their very best. Sometimes that means the best in the world, and being connected to other people and having a sense of fulfillment and the good life. If you don't have the two of those together, it's a prickly way to go through life. If you're really happy, but you don't have any sense of competency or agency in life, that's hard to do. And if you're one of the best in the world, but you don't have relationships or you don't have a community that you feel part of that holds you accountable to, it's a really hard way to go. So it's really that dual path is what we're trying to do.
Nice. And on the subject of athletes and high-performing athletes, professional athletes, one thing I've armchair psychologist myself is how petty they are. And I'll break this down for you. So I'm a lifelong New York Jets fan. And so I'm used to watching my team lose year after year after year. But up north of New York is Foxborough, Massachusetts, where the Patriots play. And for my entire adult life, all I've heard Tom Brady say is, they counted us out. No one ever thought we were going to win. Mike, they won 6 Super Bowls. No one ever counted out the Patriots. If you watch The Last Dance, the Michael Jordan and Chicago Bulls documentary, there's a scene in it where he got extra motivation to beat the Seattle Supersonics because the head coach didn't say hello to him while they were eating at a restaurant. So what is this sort of like pettiness that fuels athletes to make them think that the world's against them? And I'm talking about the best of the best. One last example, me being a Jets fan. Aaron Rodgers, who we acquired in the offseason, of course, as Jetsian as it may be, he blows his Achilles 4 plays into the season. Following day, he goes and does an interview, and he talks about his recovery and how he thinks he could be back sooner than most. And he says, I know people are counting me out and don't expect me back. And the follow-up question was, have you seen stuff on social media? People say like, no, I haven't seen anyone say that, but I know they're saying it. So talk to me about this sort of like world that these folks that are incredibly successful build that makes it seem like the world's against them.
That's a fun insight, because what you're pointing to is a first principle. Okay, so I'll get down into the mechanics and the weeds of motivation in just a minute. But as a first principle, they organize their life in a way that they work from the inside out. And you say, wait, no, that's not what I just heard. What I heard is these other people are saying something, and then it's going to influence me. Right, but they know what their ideal mindset is. They know that if they need to operate from a chip out of their shoulder, that they need to go find that in the world around them to help support it. And so they work from the inside out because they know what is required for them to be their very best from a psychological standpoint. So they look for opportunities to find the evidence so they're not quote unquote crazy. But the story that you talked about in the restaurant and somebody dissing Michael Jordan, great. He was looking for any moment. It didn't have to be him. It could be of anything to say, right, I'm coming after you, because early days, that was something that worked for them. What allowed them to progress in a dynamic way was they had to say, look, I feel like I'm barely making the team. They're not seeing what's up. I'm going to show them. And they've adopted a psychology with a chip on their shoulder, highly driven to be able to go do that thing. So they just keep manufacturing it. The challenge that you're talking about is like, the world is saying you're already the GOAT. What do you mean? But he's got to organize his internal psychology to have a chip on his shoulder. So he needs some evidence. And it can be a bit dangerous and tricky, but what they're playing with is motivation. And there's 2 basic types of motivation, internal and external. And they understand how to do it well. And from the outside, it looks like they're all external motivated. They just want the big dollar, the big house, the big watch, the big fame, whatever. But they understand how to wake up by themselves. They understand how to do all of the extra work that most people would never do, how to publicly be humiliated by their coaches and peers when they are called out publicly for not being good enough. They don't take that as humiliation, where most of us do. They work with it to fuel them. So they toggle between types of motivation. Internal motivation, the internal drive to go do the thing, the love of the way it feels to unlock something new, and the external motivations, which is the things outside of them that drive them as well. So if you can get both of those to be high, your internal drive and your external drive to be high, it's awesome. So they're playing in a playground that's a bit different than many of us.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who's not very good at anything, I see. To me, that's why. To me, it sounds like. Boy, that sounds petty. It sounds like you're literally like scanning the world to find someone to be mad at or create that chip on the shoulder you talk about. Like, these people don't have it, so they have to literally go find the chip, which is, to me, again, someone's not good at anything. To me, seems weird.
Well, I mean, you're pretty good at self-deprecation. You're pretty good at hosting conversations. You're pretty, no. So the idea is that the principle that I want to just reinforce is they know how they operate at their highest self. So they are finding ways to activate that. And so I get that if you're, the humor and jest and your comment about not being good at anything, but self-deprecation and humor is probably a way that helps you settle in, be more organically you. And so you're looking for ways to say, hey, that's petty because guys like me don't have pettiness. Like it's the function that you're using to be your very best. And so like we're all just trying to figure it out. Like all of us are just trying to figure our way through this, 100 years or less or more, somewhere in there. And there is no real roadmap, but there are some fundamental principles that we can identify that the best of the best tend to use. And again, there are freaks out there. There are guys that can and gals that can jump 42 inches after being completely hungover, punching down a couple slices of pizza, and then do something that like barely anybody can do. Like there are freaks out there. But for the most of the elite or the high performers, there's some common principles that I love talking about and sharing.
Awesome. Well, thank you for psychoanalyzing me. Do I have to send you a check or something? Or
yes. Listen, I'm just trying to figure out it as well. So money helps. Yes, please.
All right. So this is a business podcast. And the reason I wanted to get you on is, we talk about how the world is very complicated. We all have this worry that's sort of ingrained in our DNA that we've been discussing. The first rule of mastery. How can this help folks in the world of business? And I understand you do a lot of this now. But how can this book help folks nowadays?
So the first rule technically is to work from the inside out. That's technically the first rule. The subtitle of the book is what happens when you do that. So it's kind of like the first rule of health is stop drinking poison, right? Okay, that would be an interesting way to think about health development. And many of us are drinking poison, and the social poison that we have is that we are consistently worrying about what they think of us. And that it's like it's the water that we swim in, it's the air that we breathe, it's this excessive thinking and managing of being approved by others and definitely not being rejected. And so when we're in that navigation of am I okay in the eyes of others, kind of the whole thing of mastery falls apart. Really, the good life does fall apart. And note, it is not, the subtitle is not stop caring. It's not that. We need to care about some people's opinions, but it's this excessive worry that I think is one of the greatest constrictors of human potential.
Yeah, it's funny. A friend of mine, he's from South Carolina. He always gets like these Southern colloquialisms, and a friend said to him once, he goes, "What other people think of you is none of your business," which is such a great, like, simple way to live life. Obviously, as we've been discussing over the last 20 minutes, it's a little more complicated than that. This idea of not worrying about what people will think about you in the workplace, it can be tough, especially if you see more of yourself. If you have a higher opinion of yourself and you want to work your way up through a company, and obviously it's not only about performance, it's how you play well with others. So let's talk about the idea of being a high performer at work, but then having this worry hanging over you. How can that hinder people from moving up in companies or even succeeding as entrepreneurs?
I love what you're pointing to, because some people's opinions really do matter. Your supervisor, like fill in the blank of anybody who's got a position of power.
Everybody got
influence.
A boss.
That's right. Yeah. So those opinions really do matter. And so the way that it becomes complicated is when we are abandoning our first principles, our virtues, our sense of self, to be liked and approved by them. And when our identity is linked to performance, it gets really complicated. And so the quality of our performance defines who we are. And that quality of performance can be, if it's subjective performance, can radically be whipped around by their approval or potential rejection. So really what you're talking about, I think, is at the center of it, which is when our identity, I'm going to say it again, when our identity is linked to our performance, it's a whole different ballgame. It's very difficult to manage the good life, being happy and flourishing and grounded, having a sense of true autonomy in life is very difficult. And look, we are in a world that is obsessed with performance. We are in the West, certainly from a very young age, we're giving grades. We're force ranked. We are stacked against other people. Our loved ones, our aunts and uncles, our parents are overly indexed on how many points we score, like how we look when we show up to a holiday party or a wedding or an event. Like our folks, our community cares about performance. And it makes perfect sense that generations would flow from that with a thing called a performance-based identity. And that's one of the fast on-ramps to an excessive worry about what people think, because you are not who you are what you do. And if you are, in the eyes of others, not doing well enough, that means you don't matter. So the big work is to decouple who you are from what you do. And when you can decouple those two things, there is a sense of freedom on the other side where you can start caring rather than worrying about what people think of you. And this worry is rampant. It is like David Foster Wallace described, in a beautiful poem he has about the old fish and the two young fish. I don't know if you're familiar with
that
I
actually
analogy.
wrote about it in my book. Yes, this is water.
Oh, you
yes.
did? Yeah, this is what. And so that idea, like, it's so rampant. We're just missing that it's the fabric of the way that we're relating to people. Am I okay in your eyes? And that's from 200,000 years ago. We just need to take a moment, push our seats back from the table and go, who am I? Rather than how do they think about my performance and who I am? And that's the bell that I'm trying to ring right now.
I love that. But I will say, I want to pick at that thread, is that I feel like younger generations are handling that decoupling better than others. Me as a Gen Xer, running joke on the podcast, proud card-carrying Gen Xer, is that we were so linked. Our work was so linked to our identity, and you could probably go further back to boomers and the silent generation and keep going. But I feel like the younger generation, maybe even starting with millennials, but certainly Gen Z, they've found a way. And again, this is all generalization, but they've found a way to decouple in a way where they don't have to work the same job for 10 years. They could float around. It's okay to work for a couple of years, take a few months off, start a new job in another field. Do you see that as well from your perspective in terms of younger folks have been able to handle that challenge better than us old guys?
Yeah, no, we're both Gen X. So the same thing is that, generalizations aside here, is that they rang the bell saying, we're not doing life the way you think it was good. Like, no way are we going to allow a Wall Street or the bottom line for a founder or owner to extract the best of us, the best of me, where I don't know my kids, I don't know my loved ones because I'm grinding for the bottom dollar. No way. And so they shook it up a bit, and they forced us to examine like what is going on. And they also, I'm not saying they're free from FOPO. I do think that there's a high fear of people's opinions for most of the generations because they changed their lifestyle in that way. Generalizations, of course. But then there's this huge tidal wave of a swell of how you present yourself in the world to people that you don't know. And this highlight reel that's taking place, Instagram, social media, etc., this highlight reel presentation is problematic for a sense of kind of being okay with being in a mess. And the truth is, most of us don't have it buttoned up. I don't know anyone that does, actually. And so, but we're trying to keep up and present as if we do. And that becomes a very expensive organism to run. When you're propping up your highlight reel, when you go into a social event, boardroom, but you're bringing your highlight reel in as opposed to a grounded sense of trying to be purpose-based. So when you bring a purpose-based identity in versus a performance-based identity, it's a completely different organism to run. The performance-based identity is expensive. and we have to refuel that at a higher clip. That's why I think many of us are so tired. A purpose-based identity actually is a regenerative fuel. You go into environments with a purpose in mind. It's not look at me, it's let's solve this together. Can I get your support to help solve this thing? And that is regenerative. And those folks don't struggle in the same exhaustive way that most of us in multinationals do, or large corporations, or even small startups. There is a human crisis that's taking place with energy, a human energy crisis that is amongst us right now. And in the multinationals that I'm spending time with, people are tired, they're frustrated, they're overwhelmed, and they're asked to be doing more. And it's almost a disservice to not backfill that state that is happening across our workforce with proper recovery mechanisms. One of those recovery mechanisms, okay, we know sleep, we know eat well, we know hydrate well, we know it. Grandma told us those things as well. Okay, but one of the main culprits, the poison that we don't even know we're swimming in and drinking, is this high management of what do you think of me? And if you can find freedom from that, we might not need as much, precision with all of those other recovery practices. And so that's the bet that I'm laying. If you can find freedom in this way, maybe you only need 7.5 hours of sleep instead of 8.2, according to the biohacking, precision model.
It's so funny you say that. I never thought about that before because, I joke about the fact that, Gen Z and younger folks don't identify with their job. So the worry pie chart, instead of it being all about the job, they've now moved it on to other things like social media. It's so no matter how good, all us generations always think we're better than the last, we're doing something else to screw each other up, aren't we?
Well, but this is where this 200,000 year plus ancestry that's passed down this powerful brain, if we don't square up with it, it's going to just mutate into some other way that's a fear of being accepted or rejected. It's going to mutate. And look, what's going to happen with machines here soon. So we got social media, look at me, oh, I'm not good enough, I'm not fitting in, FOMO and FOPO play well together, right? But we're going to have machines. I think there's going to be a very interesting nexus that's going to take place. Global multinational HR leaders are calling attention to the people are leaving. So there's an exodus, whether it's the leaderships that's leaving or people are saying, I'm not doing this extraction model. I'm not going to work this way unless you invest in the quality of life for us. And I'm not saying you got to give me avocado and toast and whatever, but I need a sense of fulfillment. I need to know that my impact is being seen and I have my purpose in life and the company's purpose could square up and work well together. So they're calling from the extraction to the unlock. And I think what's taking place is as people are leaving because companies are not getting to the unlock model fast enough, and we've got machines coming online that are going to be incredibly smart, that if we don't reskill and if we don't adapt to a relationships with machines, we're going to fear them. So right now we're fearing each other because we want to be accepted. And it's going to be an easy transplant of psychology that we're going to fear the machines. And if we fear the machines and we push them out and they start thinking in more clever and smarter ways than we are, we could run into something dystopian there. But if, and I'm an optimist, if we figure out how to work well from the inside out, because that's the bell that's being rung for the now generation. That's what the unlock is about. Invest in me, understand my psychology, understand that I'm exhausted, give me those resources during the work hours, and know that there's a better way than just grinding. Okay, that's what's happening. It's happened since 2019, let's say. And if we get that right, we're going to have a great relationships with machines. We're going to have a great relationships with these assistants that are coming online that read faster, that can discern better, can read more than anyone else in your organization can read, and think how to solve problems that are hard to solve. That's going to happen. So are we going to embrace it or are we going to fear it? And if we can embrace it, it's based on our relationship with knowing who we are rather than fearing that somebody's going to take our jobs and somebody's going to think less of us and push us out of the tribe. If we don't reskill, it's going to be hard. And if we don't develop this sense of purpose and meaning, the unlock approach, it's going to be hard. So it does begin with the relationship you have with yourself and then the relationship with others. And the others very soon are going to be machines.
Great. Awesome. Well, let's finish this up with some advice for 2024 as folks try to, they have resolutions or they want to do, improve themselves. One of the things that we've heard since the pandemic, it's one of those, drink every time you hear it, is authenticity. Be authentic, be as real a person. The old Dave Chappelle sketch, keeping it real. How do we portray our authentic selves, our true selves, but also not worry about what other people think about us? Because I feel like that's something we could all do as baby steps to be like, okay, how could I still be real, but not have to think about everything I'm saying or doing and be accepted with the tribe?
Okay, that is great. So one, we need to be part of a tribe. So belonging is important. Like the lone wolf is the one that has been kicked out of the tribe that dies early. So being tribal is fundamental. So it's the relationship of caring versus worrying. Okay. So caring is about the other person. Worrying is about you. So this is that orientation is really important. But let me just make it really clear. If you're working from two things, you're working from first principles and or virtues or values, however you want to express, kind of those bellwethers for behavior. So maybe it's kindness or excellence or togetherness or humor or whatever it might be. If you're working from first principles that matter to you and you square that with a very clear purpose, what are you doing here? Like, what's the thing that you're trying to do in life? Maybe it's bring joy from self-deprecating humor and having great conversation with people that I like this conversation. So if that's part of your purpose, you're kicking ass. But it's those two things. What is your purpose? And are you making small little choices in your life that are aligned with your virtues, a la first principles or values? If you get those two things right, you can care about what people think, but you're not worried about it. And the people that you should care about are the ones that have already demonstrated that they care about you too. That's a very important thing. Like whose opinions do you actually care? But I want to make it simple. Purpose and virtues and values. Those are the ways to square it.
Love it. Awesome. His name is Dr. Michael Gervais. The book is The First Rule of Mastery. Stop worrying about what people think of you. Mike, thanks so much for the time. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a great 24.
Appreciate you.
And that's going to do it for the first Forbes Books podcast of 2024. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify and hit subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes. You can always connect with me on X, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Joe Pardavila or on TikTok at Jay Pardavila. And please, don't forget the golden rule and treat others as you want to be treated. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.